This is our section on Buddhism. This is part 1. Buddhism is another one of the oldest religions in the world. It is one of the 5 major religions, and it is one of the largest religions in Asia. Outside of Hinduism, the largest religion is Buddhism. It began in India as kind of an offshoot of Hinduism. It was in a lot of ways a sort of reform or answer to the problems that Hinduism put forth about the issue of dharma, the issue of karma, the issue of being stuck in the cycle of reincarnation. That sort of perspective kind of brings out the idea or asks the question, how do we get out of this cycle? In Hinduism, there is this idea of moksha, but moksha is not something that everyone can do. And not a lot is said about it in the earlier stages of life. Hinduism also had its own issues in terms of societal, social inequities, in terms of the caste system, and in terms of being sort of, you might say, stuck in one's dharma. You're born into a position, you kind of have to stay there. And also, the issue of karma asks the question of how do we counteract our karma? Because karma, as we talked about before, karma is not good. There's no good karma, right? There's only karma which keeps us stuck in the cycle of reincarnation. Buddhism comes forth and offers a new solution to breaking out of that cycle. I've used a quote here. He will deliver by the boat of knowledge the distressed world. The he is the Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, who we're going to talk about today. Now, there are actually many, many different Buddhas. A Buddha is not a god. A Buddha is a human being who has reached enlightenment and broken the bonds of reincarnation. Anyone can become a Buddha, and in fact, in Buddhism, ultimately, we all will become Buddhas. There's this idea that sooner or later, every person will reach an incarnation where you yourself will find enlightenment and break out of the cycle of reincarnation. The Buddha that people usually talk about, though, is the Shakyamuni Buddha. The one who founded this particular religious tradition was the Shakyamuni Buddha. And that's who we talk about when we say the Buddha. So he will deliver by the boat of knowledge the distressed world. Here, deliver means, right, like to save. He will save the distressed world with the boat of knowledge. And it's a very important part of Buddhism, something you really have to understand, that knowledge and understanding your situation, that we are stuck in the cycle of reincarnation, that we're attached to this world, which is kind of illusionary. Without that knowledge, you can't break free. You just get stuck here. So the boat of knowledge comes and takes you away from it, right? Included a picture here of a large Buddha statue. You can see, very typically, Buddha is shown in meditation. Meditation is a very important practice within Buddhism. It's the main practice, really. To either side, you can see what look like lotuses. Again, the image of the lotus remains very important in Buddhism. And there's a little incense holder. The way many Buddhists pray, or the way they practice, is when they go to shrines and temples. And I want to say that I think this is Japan. I think this particular statue is in Japan. You go and you light incense, and you wave your incense, and it's an offering. And there's also kind of this idea that the incense itself, the smoke of the incense, brings your prayers up. But you don't worship the Buddha, and we'll talk more about that next week. We'll talk about practice, Buddhist practice next week. This week we're going to talk a lot about the philosophy and theology. It isn't really a theology because there's no God. We'll get to that in a second as well. There's definitely this. So you don't worship the Buddha. You pray to the Buddha. You revere the Buddha. And most importantly, you pray to your own inner Buddha. Because, as I say, you're going to reach enlightenment as well one day, right? So you're praying, or you're showing reverence for your inner Buddha and recognizing that. Your own Buddha mind. This is the symbol of Buddhism. It's a wheel. It has 8 spokes. We're going to talk about that, the Eightfold Path, and why this is important to Buddhism. And of course, the circle represents the cycle that we're in, right? We're in that cycle. So our goals for today are to learn about the life of Siddhartha Gautama, who is the man who became the Shakyamuni Buddha. We're also going to learn about Buddhist Dharma, the fact that Dharma to a Buddhist means something different than it does to a Hindu. We talked a lot about Dharma in our section on Hinduism. Now, Buddhism takes the word Dharma and it kind of changes it a little bit, right? And we'll learn about that. We'll learn about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So let's just look at a timeline. So the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Shakyamuni Buddha, was in the 5th century BCE, so it's about 2,500 years ago, about the time that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were being written down. It wasn't until 258, about 250 years later, that Buddhism began to spread outside of India. Buddhism very much took hold in India and became a major religion, replaced Hinduism in a lot of parts of the country. Eventually some Hindu kings decided to reclaim land in the name of Hinduism and push the Buddhists out. And now, even until today, Hinduism is the major religion in India, but Buddhism had its start in India. Wasn't until 250 that Ashoka, a famous Buddhist monk, spread Buddhism to China, to many other places where it took hold. We won't talk about Theravada today, but that's one of the major sects, the major denominations of Buddhism. It wasn't until 29 BCE, about almost 500 years after the life of Siddhartha, that the canon was written down. It was written down on Sri Lanka, which is a small island just south of India. Now, canon means the sort of the decided or the agreed upon scripture, right? If something is canon, it means that the authorities of a religion agree that this is the foundation of their religion. It might be in any religion there might be multiple writings that aren't canon. They're not accepted by the authority as being authoritative and as being important or as being 100% truthful. Similar actually to Christianity, it took a long time before the words of the Buddha were written down. For a long time it was just spread by word of mouth. Okay. And it was written down in Pali, which is a language. It's not Sanskrit, and was the language of Sri Lanka at the time. Until today, and you'll see in the book, a lot of Buddhist terms have 2 words: the Sanskrit word and the Pali word. I use the Sanskrit, but in the book you'll see both, and many Buddhists use the Pali. I choose to use the Sanskrit because I want to show you the similarities and differences between Buddhism and Hinduism. That way you can see the way both religions use the same words, but use them differently. Okay? And the rest of this history we'll get to later this week. So I want to take a look at this quote. In 1993, Parliament of World Religions was held in Chicago, and it's a very important meeting between religious leaders when they have a chance to meet in a major city and have a conference, and they give speeches, and they try and help each other understand their own religions and their own traditions. And it's an opportunity for interfaith work. It's an opportunity for kind of peacemaking and education. And so I believe 1993, I don't think it was the first time Buddhists were invited, but there was an issue that people didn't understand Buddhism because they thought the Buddha is a god. Buddhism does not have any gods. Buddhism, in the strictest sense, is non-theistic. It does not have a god. Now, they don't completely deny the existence of a god. Many Buddhist leaders say there could be a god, but they're not. Buddhism isn't really interested in the concept of God. It's not really important to them. We'll talk more about that in the next lesson. It's very interesting. The Buddha is not a god. The Buddha is a person. And this is how the Buddhist leaders explained what Buddhism is and who the Buddha is to other religious leaders. It says, the Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, was not God or a god. He was a human being who attained full enlightenment through meditation and showed us the path of spiritual awakening and freedom. Therefore, Buddhism is not a religion of God. Buddhism is a religion of wisdom, enlightenment, and compassion. Say that again. Wisdom, enlightenment, and compassion. This is very important in terms of practice and the way Buddhists are supposed to treat each other with compassion. Like the worshippers of God who believe that salvation is available to all through confession of sin and a life of prayer, we Buddhists believe that salvation and enlightenment are available to all through the removal of delusion and a life of meditation. Talk more about this delusion later. However, unlike those who believe in God, who is separate from us, Buddhists believe that Buddha, which means one who is awake and enlightened, that's what the word Buddha means, one who is awake and enlightened, is inherent in us all as Buddha nature, or Buddha mind. So as I mentioned with that first slide, the way Buddhists go to temples and Buddhist images of the Buddha, and they pray, and they show reverence. They're not only showing reverence for those who have reached enlightenment, they are showing reverence for their own Buddha nature, their own Buddha mind, which has yet to manifest, but is inherent in all of us. All of us have the ability to find enlightenment. It's not exactly like the idea of Brahman, and we're going to talk next time about how it's different, the idea of Brahman and the idea of Atma. It actually, in that, it sounds very similar, but in fact, it's very, very different. It's very different between Buddhism and Hinduism, what the Buddha nature is versus what Hindus believe the Atma, the soul, is. It's very different. Buddhists don't actually believe in a set, fixed soul, which seems strange, but will make sense. Will make sense in time. Let's just take this one a little bit at a time, though. So the life of Siddhartha. There are a lot of legends told about Siddhartha. He was born a prince. He was born of the noble caste, the highest caste in India in 563 BCE. There are a lot of stories about that his mother had a vision of a white elephant when she conceived him. A white elephant is very rare, and it's a symbol of royalty, and it came to be known by Buddhists as a symbol of the Buddha himself. It was also said that, some people said that when Buddha was born, he stood up and walked several steps and then turned and said to the midwife and to his mother, newborn baby said, "This will be my last incarnation." It's also said that his father went to a fortune teller before he was born, and the fortune teller told the king, "Your son will either be a great, great king that will unite all the kingdoms and be a great warrior and a great leader and found this huge empire, or he will be a spiritual master who will lead countless people to liberation and enlightenment." And the king wanted his son to be a king as well. And so, according to the story, the king came up with this idea that he would hide the truth of suffering and of the world from his son, so his son would never know that there was such things as poverty, as sickness, as death. And it would instead keep him in the palace and surround him with luxury and young, beautiful people, so that he would stay there and be a king and not be inspired to go out, to leave the palace and to try to help, the sick and the poor the way spiritual masters do. So the story goes that when he wasn't Buddha yet, when Siddhartha would go out into the city, servants would go ahead of him, and if there was anyone who was poor or sickly or old or dying, around the street, they would hide them. They would shoo them away. They'd keep them away so that all his life he never saw those people. And the story goes that one day he went out, and the servants missed one person, and the Siddhartha came across a sick man, and he said, and Siddhartha said to one of his servants, "What is wrong with this man? He's lying on the ground, he's groaning, and there's something wrong with him." And he said, "Oh, he's sick." Siddhartha said, "Well, what's sick?" And so the servants had explained to him about sickness, how people get sick, and Siddhartha was shocked. He's like, "I didn't know that happened to people." So another time he went out, and the servants missed an old man, old man who was, crouched over with a long beard, was very skinny, had a cane, and Siddhartha saw him. He said to his servants, "Who's that? What is strange about this man? Look how his skin sags on him, and his hair is very white and very thin." And his servant said, "Oh, he's old. Everyone gets old. The sooner, the longer you live, the older you get, until eventually you become like that." Siddhartha's like, that's very strange. I've never seen it like that before. And then, another time he goes out, and he sees a corpse. He says that he sees a dead body. And he says to his servants, "That man is sleeping on the road." And they see the way the dead man has been, wrapped up by his family to be taken to a place of cremation. They say, no, he's not asleep, he's dead. They explain to Siddhartha what death is. And now he's really troubled. Now Siddhartha's very troubled by this. That people, they get sick and they suffer, they get old. No matter what happens, they get old and they die. It's very upsetting to him. Finally, he goes out one day and he sees a man covered, just like Shiva, covered in white ashes, his hair long on the side of the road and very little clothes. People are giving him money and food. And Siddhartha says, "Is he sick? Who is this man?" And they say, "He's an ascetic. He's a holy man, and he has left the world, and he's left behind all of his material possessions and desires and pleasures to seek wisdom." So now Siddhartha knows what he wants to do. Like a light bulb goes off, right? So, against the wishes of his father and his mother, he leaves the palace. He decides to leave. He has a wife and a child. He leaves them as well. His wife, it said, was this wonderful woman who was also very close to finding enlightenment as well. She was a very spiritual mind, and she understood what her husband had to do. So he leaves. At the age of 29, he goes out to seek a solution to suffering. He is very troubled by the problem of suffering in the world. And he becomes an ascetic, a strict ascetic, for 6 years. He goes from guru to guru, from ashram to ashram, and he learns what he can. And everywhere he goes, he's so brilliant and he's so spiritually minded that the gurus and yogis are just shocked. They teach him, and he just picks up everything, and he asks intelligent questions until one day, each guru, one by one, the gurus say, "No, there's nothing else I can teach you. You have to move on. I've taught you everything that I can teach you." So it goes on to another ashram and another, one guru after another. And finally, he finds a guru who practices an extremely strict ascetic lifestyle with very, very little food, constant meditation, very, very little sleep, and it's very difficult on him. And so Siddhartha is traveling on his own, and he comes to a village called Bodh Gaya, and he settles himself under a Bodhi tree, a very famous tree in India, very sacred tree. Anytime you see a Bodhi tree, it's always decorated. It's a sacred tree. So he sits down, and he's so weak and exhausted from traveling, from not eating, from constant meditation with no rest, that he can barely even sit up, and so he kind of collapses under this tree. In some versions of the story, he's found by a widow. In some versions, he's found by little children. Somebody finds him. Someone of a very humble background from a small village find him, and they show him compassion, and they bring him a bowl of rice and some milk. So he eats the rice, he drinks the milk, and of course he feels better, and he realizes that now that he's eaten, and now he's rested, he's a more clear mind, and he's able to think more clearly. And that's when it occurs to him that growing up, he had a lifestyle that was one extreme in terms of his palace life, with anything he wanted, any food, any entertainment, any luxuries that he wanted in the palace. And he went to the other extreme asceticism, with very little, if anything at all. And that's when he realized the answer is not either extreme. The answer is the middle path. It's very important in Buddhism, this idea of the middle path. That is how you find enlightenment. That is the right way. Neither extremes, right? So he sat in meditation under the tree every day. In some versions of the story it was a widow. In some versions little children brought him food every day, and he sat there. He just ate enough every day to keep himself going. Not too much, not too little. And he sat under the tree for 40 days and 40 nights. And in some versions of the story, he started to come very, very close to finding enlightenment as he was in meditation, thinking about all these problems, trying to understand where suffering was coming from. In some versions, a demon god saw this and got very angry that this 35-year-old man, not very old, was going to reach enlightenment, and thought that he didn't deserve it. He wasn't worthy of finding enlightenment. And so there are a lot of Buddhist art scenes of this demon king appearing and trying to tempt the Buddha with beautiful dancing women, or trying to frighten him with horrifying monsters, or talking to him, trying to confuse him, trying to ask him riddles that had no answers, all these different things to try and distract him, keep him from finding enlightenment. And Siddhartha, this climax, just reaches his hand down, he touches the earth, and he calls the earth to witness for him. And the Earth Mother, the Earth Goddess herself, appears and witnesses for him and says he is ready for this, and he deserves this. And the demon god, being, assuaged or told off, goes away, and the Buddha finds enlightenment. He comes to understand the world and the secrets of suffering, the secrets of breaking the cycle of suffering and reincarnation. So he spends the next 45 years teaching others the same. Spends a long time. He gains a lot of followers. A lot of people become nuns and monks under him. And that's kind of the only clergy. There aren't Buddhist priests so much. There aren't, there's just temples with Buddhist images, and then there are monasteries where monks and nuns live. And traditionally, a good deal of the Buddhist population, of the people of China, Japan, all these places, Thailand, many, many people became monks and nuns for a short time. That was not uncommon at all. And in some parts, like Thailand, it was common. It was normal for a young man to around 12 years old, would go to a monastery and be a monk for a few years and then come out. And that was kind of his coming of age when he came out of the monastery. Now he's a man, now he's going to take a wife and have children and things like that. But the monastery life is very important. The Sangha is very important to Buddhist society. When he died, 45 years after he found enlightenment, he reached Nirvana. So having found enlightenment when he died, this life cycle was extinguished. Like a flame was extinguished. That's what Nirvana means. It was extinguished. And what's beyond Nirvana? It's not really spoken a lot about in Buddhism. There's some ideas that you kind of return to the one source, or you in some ways help others on earth reach enlightenment as well. But it's not really clear. This is something that Buddhism is not really interested in, like the existence of God or the creation of the world. Buddhism is not interested in these questions. Buddhism is interested in right here and right now, the fact that you and I are stuck in the cycle, and how do we get out? That is Buddhism's main question. But he did. He reached Nirvana, and he moved on. And he became known as the Shakyamuni Buddha, the Great Soul. And this is the founder of Buddhism. Okay, so a little map to give you an idea. Here's India, right? Here's Sri Lanka, which I mentioned before. That's where the canon was originally written down in Pali. Still a lot of Buddhists in Sri Lanka. These are the Himalayas, where Mount Everest and things are. This is Nepal, a major country where the Himalayas are. Up here would be China. China's pretty big. So this is where Siddhartha lived his life. Lumbini is where he was conceived. And Sakya was his kingdom, right? Like Shakyamuni. Shakya. This was the kingdom that his father ruled, and this is kind of what the path that he traveled. It was a major merchant route. Bodh Gaya, the place where he found enlightenment, is right here, and to this day, that's it's the biggest pilgrimage site for Buddhists is Bodh Gaya. So it's about 150 miles or so they've traveled on foot. These are some different images. I want to show you how Buddhism moves from country to country. This image right here, we're going to start with this one. See, he has Indian features in this picture because he was Indian and because this picture was painted in India. But as religions move, religious images take on the features of the people who are painting them, right? People are looking to find themselves, to relate to these pictures themselves, so they change. So he's in a deer park. We're going to talk about the deer park in a second. See the little deer back here? And the monks. This was his first sermon. First sermon he gave was in the deer park. That's very, very important scene. This is the Jade Buddha. It is in Thailand, which is a major Buddhist nation. It is one solid piece of jade. It's big. It's big. It is one of the greatest treasures of the world. You know, it is beyond priceless to find. Number one, to find a piece of jade that large, and to carve it into such a beautiful image. But also, it's historic. It has a great deal of historical and religious significance. You can see here, he's touching the earth. He's calling the earth to witness, and he does it again down here. You can see the demon king. And the beautiful women and the frightening, demons trying to affect him. He calls the earth to witness. Now there's another famous version. There's another famous story of someone calling the earth to witness, and not about the Buddha, about Sita. In the Ramayana, in some versions of the Ramayana, when Rama finally rescues his wife Sita from the demon king, he says to her, "Now you've been in here for like 7 years, and I know the demon king really liked you. You got to tell me, did something happen between you two?" And Sita says, "No, I swear nothing happened. Nothing happened." So he says, "Okay," and Rama takes Sita back to the kingdom, and then in their celebration, when they throw a big party for the return of Rama and Sita in front of everyone, Rama says to Sita, "Now you told me, right, nothing happened between you and the demon king." And Sita's horribly, embarrassed and humiliated. She's a good Hindu woman. She would never do something like that. And have her husband suggest that in front of everyone was, just horrible for her. And so she cries out, and she calls upon the earth to witness. And the Earth Mother appears and chastises Rama and says, "How could you? You know your wife is a good woman. Why would you, even suggest such a thing?" And then everyone knows that Sita's innocent. So there's this kind of trope of the Earth Mother, the Earth Goddess, when she witnesses for you, that is a sign of your worthiness and your purity. That's a really big deal in Hindu and in Buddhist mythology. Now here, this is actually in Bodh Gaya. This is a Bodhi tree. It's not the Bodhi tree, but this is a Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya. We put a statue here. This is the sleeping Buddha, right? It's actually the Buddha on his deathbed. When he dies, he reaches Nirvana. And this is another common image in Buddhist art. These are all common images. Now this is the oldest image in Buddhist art. We're going to see a lot of these footprints. These footprints represent path of the Buddha, the path taken, and the story of his life as he traveled on foot. it is interesting that in early Buddhism, they tried to avoid making images of the Buddha because they didn't want people to worship the Buddha as if they worshipped like Hindu idols, right? The Buddha is not to be worshipped. The Buddha is to be emulated, to be copied. We have to learn from the Buddha. So they would use this footprint as an image for the Buddha and the Buddha's story and his teachings. But eventually, people started making images of him. The same thing actually happened in Christianity. In very early Christianity, they avoided making images of Christ because for the same reason. They didn't want people to idolize these images. But people like images. Just like in the Hinduism in America, the woman says it's not so much about worshiping the image. It's a focal point. It calms your mind. It makes you think about what's important, and it reminds you. It's a teaching tool. Reminds you of the story, of what happened to these people. But we'll see a lot of footprints as we study Buddhism. So, Dharma does not mean what you think it means anymore. We spent all this time talking about Dharma, now I'm going to flip it on you. In Buddhism, Dharma is a very simple concept. It is a very, very simple concept. When a Buddhist says Dharma, or in the Pali dialect, they'll say Dhamma. It's the same thing, Dharma, Dhamma. It means the Buddhist teachings, specifically the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the Three Marks of Existence. Dharma means the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, specifically. That's it. End of story. No, it doesn't get any more philosophical than that. It's very straightforward. And this wheel represents the Dharma, right? So let's take a look at the Buddhist Dharma. Here's this sermon at Deer Park, where he put forth you see the Buddha, and everyone listening to him, and their little deer down here. This is where he first put forth his Dharma, his teachings. Over here is an image of him dying. As I say, it's a very common image. So the Four Noble Truths explain our existence and the existence of suffering. First, to live is to suffer. There's a story that a woman came to the Buddha one time. A lot of people came to him with their personal problems, and she said, I hear you're a holy man, and my son has died, and I can't live without him. Do you have the power to bring him back to life? And the Buddha said to her, I want you to go and bring me a cup of mustard seeds from a family that has not had a death. So she goes out, she goes to her neighbors. Have you experienced, I need a cup of mustard seeds from a family that hasn't experienced death. And they say, no. We've had deaths, our grandmother, our grandfather, this person or that person. She goes around her neighborhood, and no one can help her, so she spreads out to the other neighborhoods in her city. She goes from household to household. She spends all night going from household to household until it finally dawns on her that every family has experienced death. Everyone has experienced loss and suffering. It's a part of life. No one gets out of that. Even if you're a holy man and if you have special powers, you don't get out of that. To live is to eventually experience suffering. So, why? Why do we have to suffer? The cause of suffering is self-centered desire and attachment, which is dukkha, to the world, which is impermanent, or nitya. So the world is impermanent. The world keeps changing, and things keep going away. New things come and old things go. It's constantly like that. That's what impermanence means. Nothing's permanent. But we get attached to these things in the world. There's this amazing story I read. I think I read it online. I might have read it in your textbook, actually, of a nun, a Buddhist nun, who spent her life in a hostel taking care of the dying. People specifically brought people who were dying to this hostel, taken care of by the nuns, And she said, I'm constantly amazed at how shocked people are when they realize that they're dying. Of course, everyone's dying. It's an eventuality. Everyone must die, and yet everyone is so shocked and grieved and despairing to know that they're going to die. Right? This is a part of life, according to Buddhism. And the reason why it hurts so much is because we become attached. We become attached to the idea of life and living. We become attached to the people around us. We become attached to our physical things. If you've ever been brokenhearted because you broke your cell phone, right? That cell phone was impermanent. It was always going to be broken. It was always going to get old. It was always going to break sooner or later. But you became attached to it. And you thought that, you didn't think that one day you'd have to let go of it. And that's why we suffer. So, the solution then is therefore to eliminate desire and attachment for things that are impermanent, right? Logically. How do we do that? You might ask. Well, the Buddha had a solution. The Eightfold Path. It's very interesting. A lot of Buddhism comes back to your state of mind, the way you look at the world, and having a proper perspective of the world. And it's very much reflected in the Eightfold Path, right? So remember the 8 spokes of the wheel? They are right understanding, right thought and motivation, or intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, and right mindfulness. So we start with the mind, right? Because you can't do anything in Buddhism unless you have the right understanding and the right intent. So you have to understand reality through the Four Noble Truths. You have to see through illusions. That's right understanding. That's number 1. Number 2, right thought and motivation. You have to uncover and weed out unwholesome emotional roots that guide our thinking, like lust, greed, anger, revenge, hatred, ignorance, emotional roots that guide our thinking and our actions, so we can become free from self-centeredness. It's not about the self. It's not about you. And in that way, Buddhism, again, it comes back to compassion, having compassion for other people. It's not about you. It's about taking care of other people too. And recognizing that the self is impermanent, right? So once you have your right thinking, your right understanding, right thinking, then you can begin to act. You act with right speech, which means no vain talk, no gossip, no harsh words, no lying. Communication has to further truth and harmony. That's what communication needs to do. And then right action. There are 5 rules of moral action. Do not destroy life. Do not steal. Do not avoid sexual misconduct. Do not lie. Do not use intoxicants. And above all else, all action should be based on clear understanding. Right? So you start with a correct way of thinking, and that leads you to correct action. You speak correctly, you have correct action. You also need to have right livelihood. The way you make your living should not harm others. You cannot be a mobster. You cannot be the good fellows and then go to your Buddhist temple. No. The Buddha says this very clearly. The way you make your living should not harm anyone. And it takes effort, right effort, which is to say constant effort to achieve these goals. Some of you out there of Christian background might remember that in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says you should pray without ceasing, constantly pray. Hindus, as we've seen, believe you should be devoted. You should devote yourself to the gods without ceasing in every aspect of your life, whether you're working or cooking or taking care of your children or anything. You should be devoted and trying to find union. In Buddhism, it's constant effort to keep your mind clean, to keep your actions right. And all of these, and what's interesting is all of these actions lead back again into right thinking. Right? You see, the next rule is right mindfulness. So being mindful, being clear-minded. So we started with right understanding and right thoughts, which led to right actions, which have just led right back to right thoughts. It's very important. You need to be mindful. That's how you liberate yourself. You have to continually check your mind, be on guard, pull yourself out like an elephant from the mud. What that means is that you have to be aware, not get stuck, not lose yourself in your emotions or your thoughts, but be aware of your world. Be aware of reality. And finally, the perfect harmony between right action and right thought, right meditation. Meditation is a very important practice in Buddhism, as we've learned today. You have to apply mental discipline to quiet the mind. The Buddha said, is subtle, invisible, and treacherous. Those are strong words, right? Treacherous. The Buddha said you have to use skillful means to see and understand its nature. And later this week we're going to have a chance to actually practice some meditation as part of the class. You can get a feel for what that means. What does it mean to meditate, to clear your mind? Why is that important? So that is the Eightfold Path. Now you have the ability to reach enlightenment yourself. So the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path.